I'd like to welcome to the special screening of the film A Letter to Mandela, which had its world premiere last night. The director. It's a special event because we are very happy that he's here and very honored that he came. And to be here with us to share some of his views on his film, his country, and of course, the man himself, Nelson Mandela. But for the moment, would you like to welcome Khalo Matabane? I think it would be appropriate if you have questions during our talk. We've got a microphone over there. Just put up your hand and ask anything you like. Okay, we've had a few moments after the credits. Khalo, welcome once again.
Thank you.
The first thing you usually ask a South African when he visits Holland is how do you find the cold and the darkness? But I won't ask you that because I can anticipate the answer. The next thing you ask him is where you're from. So let's start at the beginning. Could you tell us a bit about your background and also relating to the film, what were your experiences with apartheid growing up in South Africa?
That's a lot to share. I grew up in a village that you can see. I grew up with my grandmother. I grew up in a village where nothing happened, where life was repetitive, very hot, where we physically had to get water with a wheelbarrow. But I grew up in a very protected family, a kind of rural intellectual family, that's how I put it, where I read. I'm very lazy. I'm lazy even now. I can't do my dishes. I can't do anything else. I'm like really like, you know. So as a kid, I was studying, reading. My grandmother used to send me to go and buy newspapers, you know, and I would read the newspapers on the way.
But also a religious family, you say in the film.
Religious family, not in an extreme sense of way, but yeah, of course, I grew up in a Christian family. So, you know, there was a lot of Christian values that were installed, but we also were very rural, so we believed in rituals, African rituals. I have since then have very little Christian faith and a very little African spiritual faith, some floating.
Yeah.
And I think it makes it really, it makes me almost not belong in a way, you know. But yeah, my childhood was, I don't want to say it's corny to say my childhood was hard because people's lives were hard and people's lives are hard anyway, every day, you know. When I was coming here outside the hotel, I saw a group of guys who, it was the first time I saw almost people who looked homeless, you know.
In Amsterdam.
Yes. And their faces were so hard and because it's so cold and everything else. So I don't want to be one of those who claim poverty and harshness as a unique and a special thing.
Yeah,
of course, under apartheid it was structural, so that made it different.
I was wondering, as watching the film again, you mentioned that Mandela became for you a hero while he was still little. Can you tell us something about that? When he became, how did he become this hero figure for you when you were small?
Because of the stories that my grandmother told me, and when I was trying to make the film, I tried to go, you know, to verify whether the stories were true or not. But my grandmother had passed away by then, so that became irrelevant. But I wanted to sort of, you know, I started. This idea for the film didn't start in South Africa or didn't start with anything. It started with a trip in Spain. I was actually, that's how the idea came. I was in Spain and it was during the, you know, at the Basque area, and it was a place that I really wanted to stay there and write, and I loved the people, I loved the food. It's fantastic part, San Sebastian. And and it was during that era of ETA, and there was a lot of bombing going off and everything else, and I had like a personal kind of encounter. And at the evening that when we were having dinner, one of the people who were sitting there said, you know, human rights law. I said, I've been to South Africa, and what Spain needs is a Nelson Mandela to unify the country. And I thought, this is amazing. You know, you have this figure that the world think he can unite. He can, you know, he can wave his magic, and all the conflict and all the injustices and all the wars and everything else disappears. You know, it's unrealistic. It's untrue. But I have to tell you that also in the documentary, I was searching for my childhood hero, a man that I, as you can see later, I have a little very connection with him, and I got disconnected when he came out of prison, and I couldn't recognize him. I couldn't recognize the values that my grandmother told me about him. I couldn't recognize everything, and I thought to myself, did I make these stories up? Did I make the stories to make my childhood more profound, more political, more philosophical, a little bit more pretentious and enriched? And so, you know, it was all those kind of things. And I like this idea where I didn't know whether it was true fiction or real.
And the very interesting form you chose for the film, the form of a letter to Mandela, it's something very personal. But at the same time, it seems to stand for such a universal thing, not only in South Africa, but also, as you see in the film, all over the world. But tell me about this form of a letter writing to Mandela. You seem to engage in a very personal conversation with him, which I remember, and you can see that a lot of South Africans have that they have a very personal relationship with him. It's not like he's a myth, but it's like he's really their father. Is that the reason why you chose this very personal form?
No, actually. I've always been fascinated by letters. There was a great book I read when I was young, and it was between the playwright Sam Shepard and his partner then, and they had these beautiful letters, and I actually kept on asking friends of mine that we should write a book where we have letters and we write to each other about things. Actually, I started writing it at one stage. I remember I was fascinated with Venezuela, and I lived in Venezuela for a while. I spent time there, and I was writing these emails with friends of mine, and I wanted to publish them about my impressions of Venezuela and Hugo Chavez. So and also I used to write a lot of letters to my grandmother also when I traveled and thing. I really love letters. I mean, I'm a little bit too tired these days to write letters, but I really love writing letters. I used to write letters as a kid. I don't think it had. I'm not even sure. I don't know whether South Africans look him at as the so-called father of the nation and all those kind of things. I think those concepts. And I also feel like sometimes his meaning is bigger outside South Africa than it is.
Okay, because that was my next question. Because that's I think what strikes me the most watching this film. It seems like it's almost rewriting the myth we have of Mandela here. Maybe the audience can tell us about what they feel about how they see Mandela. There's one question over there. Two actually.
It's actually not about the myth, but more about the struggle that you had with the forgiveness and the apology. I felt that you struggled in the movie with that. Has that changed after the movie now? Your personal feeling as a filmmaker about that, and what is your view on that? How is that going to affect South Africa in the future, or will it? Or
so the theme of what you're asking is. The whole idea of forgiveness, is that something real in South Africa, and will it have any consequences for the future?
Yeah, and well, has your personal opinion about that changed after making this movie?
Okay.
Someone asked me a similar question yesterday, actually, the commissioning editor, Nick Fraser from BBC. And I think that, I don't consider myself to be very emotional as a person. And I think if you're a filmmaker and you do all this political stuff that I've been doing since I was 19, and I get attached to all of them when I'm making them, I think then I'm in serious trouble. I'll have some kind of disorder. I don't think I have come to. There was a time when I thought films could change the world. I don't think that either. I think if you want to change the world, you have to be like, you have to find other ways to do it, like Che Guevara and go into the bush and fight. I think cinema has dismally failed to change the world. That's my view. I think it does provoke, I think it does question, I think it does whatever, but I think the system is so incredible that one is fighting, that even the purity of art itself has been so diluted, that art itself has been so bastardized. Even the greatest artists, the greatest thinkers, they've been so bastardized under different things like structure, distribution, of all those kind of things. So I don't know, and I don't think I've learned anything from making this film, except that I think it's difficult to talk about Nelson Mandela. I interviewed more than 60 people across the world, from South Sudan to Nigeria to New York to London and India, and it's difficult for people to talk about Nelson Mandela. Those who love him take for granted that we should all love him. Yes, and therefore they don't have to explain why they love him. And those who don't love him think they can just say he sold out, and that's enough for us not to love him. So you have a dilemma. And the dilemma is this critical thinking, this contradiction that one is searching for, that one cannot find. And I think that's what I've learned, that it's easy to, on Twitter, to write 140 words about how incredible he is or how he sold out or whatever, but to really engage and try to find the meaning of Nelson Mandela in times that we live in, I think that I've learned.
I'm just wondering if the meaning of your film changes as soon as it leaves the shores of South Africa. If you see the film here, maybe that will change people's minds of Mandela himself, because you do put some really serious question marks, and I have to say question marks that we don't usually read in the media and see in the media here. So maybe in that sense your film will have an impact in that it's a sort of a correction on the myth that people have abroad of Mandela. There was a question over there. Is that related to this? But
yes, thank you. Well, I feel that I'm impressed. It's a beautiful film, although it's a tough film, and it's like taking sides. And it's good that we see that nobody is perfect. You cannot be God. You can act as God, but we don't. Gods are failing anyway.
And your question?
And the question is, this film can become a book, I think. I feel that I need to see it again. There are so many stories that we have to see and hear again. And I hope that we'll have the chance to see it again, and I hope that you will go to make it into a book. And another question is, I thought that you will get an answer from him or from somebody more closer to him, if it is possible, which I think it's not possible. There's such a
yes, I understand the question that you're asking, which is an interesting one, because there are some proponents of the traditional Mandela myth, and you let them speak. They say that they perpetuate the myth, but at the same time you question it. So I was wondering if you can tell us anything about how people are viewing him in South Africa at the moment. Is there sort of rift developing between people who still revere him as this mythical god, and people who really question the meaning of that idea? Is that rift also visible in South Africa then?
I think the difficulty with your question, which is both very provocative and interesting, but also puts me against the wall, is, and I always answer this question because I get it with all my work, and I answer it, when the Los Angeles riots happened, and Rodney King got beaten up, and CNN went to Spike Lee and they said, what next? Is America about to explode? I said, how does he know? He's a filmmaker. Why is CNN going to a filmmaker to ask this question? So in a in a funny way, I mean, there are how many 50 million plus South Africans. My interaction is probably with like 2% of society. So I don't know, but I mean, there is obviously this. I think, like any other society, there are questions that people ask their place and their counter arguments and everything else. I don't think that the idea of the film is to actually find the truth, because there is no truth. There's just perception and perspective. What is interesting when I started making it was the idea that perhaps in the contradictions of these arguments, there lies somehow shades of truth. There lies in this provocation of, from the Dalai Lama to Kwame and to everyone else saying everything else, that there is somewhere there where we can start having the meaning of Nelson Mandela. And I think it lies there in this conflict of ideas,
Yeah. That's quite really interesting. Just one observation. I left South Africa about 22 years ago, and I remember when I left, all art in the country was political. You couldn't make any piece of art without making a political statement and without putting somebody against the wall. Now we're 20 years later, and you're saying, "Don't put me against the wall." Is that? It seems like art has been liberated from this idea of being overtly political.
Or I'm just a coward. I do feel, it's really weird, because a friend of mine who's a great South African filmmaker yesterday, after he saw the film, said, "I thought it was going to be more critical." I said, "It is critical." Anyway. But I think for me as a filmmaker, one of the things that I try to avoid is to make ultimate statements, because I also understand my own weaknesses and I understand my own flaws as a human being. So what I try to do is to open up with my work. I try to open up these debates for people, and I think films that I love make you feel conflicted after you watch them, or while you are watching them. You feel conflicted, you feel torn apart. And I think for me, I'm not one of those filmmakers who really personally enjoy films that tell you what life is or what ideology works better. So I try to do that with a film. But do I feel liberated? I don't know. I mean, for every freedom, my grandmother used to tell me a story, says, in order to go forward, you take 2 steps forward and 1 step backwards. And when and it's quite an interesting thing. I didn't understand it until a couple of years ago. I went to Iran, and on the pavements in Iran, there were women knitting. And I would pass these women every day in the morning, and it felt like they were not knitting, because it wasn't like a machine going, you know what I mean? They were knitting and it was going almost backwards. And I thought, this is fascinating. Like, they're building this cloth and this whole thing, but they actually have to go backwards in order to go forward. And I think with every sense of liberation, there is a kind of arrested development. There's a lot of thing. I mean, the Polish filmmaker, Krzysztof Kieslowski, says that, the 3 colors, red, blue, one of my favorite filmmakers of all time, says that, when in communist Poland, there will just be plain censorship. And he went to live in France and became very successful and returned to Poland. He says now the dictatorship is gone and the communist government is gone. And in a capitalist Poland, they just say there is no money for your kind of films. So I think this is the real dilemma, this dilemma of what, you are free in South Africa. But of course, when I was making this film and I said to them, to our national broadcaster and other people, no one wanted to pick up the film. And at one stage...
Why was that? Because it wasn't... Why? What was
They didn't tell me the reasons. But one of the things that they said with the national SABC is that they said, they need to put a clause in the contract that say they will only show the film 2 or 3 years after Nelson Mandela has died.
Oh, well,
Then I said, this is a ridiculous thing. I'm not going to even sign it. It's ridiculous. So
but was that a political a political issue with the national broadcaster? Because the national broadcaster has traditionally, in the whole history of the corporation, been just an extension of the government. Really, is that what is going on here? They don't want to show your film because it's too critical.
I mean, that's what I'm saying, that it became complex because they were not like, we don't want to show it. We were like saying, it's the moment. It's about the timing. And they were like, he's ill now. I mean, you can't have a film like this about him when he's very ill.
That sounds like, to us, that would sound like censorship.
You know what I mean? So what I'm saying is that freedom is very complex. And I'm not sure whether it exists anywhere. I mean, like, where does it exist? I mean, where does it exist in the world? I mean, certainly in places that I've spent time in, even in the West, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
They tell you a lot of things about distribution, about making the money back, about how many people are going to watch it. But all this are new forms of censorship, I think, Yeah. So
there was a question over there.
Hi, it's very impressive, the range of people you interview in this film. And I'm curious how you got everybody to agree to be filmed for this. And I imagine you had to cut out a lot of interesting things that they said. If there's anything that you think would be relevant to mention now, including the mother at the end, how you actually convinced her to be in the film.
So, Khalo, that's putting you against the wall again. You have to spill the beans.
I forgot to tell you, there's a book actually that's getting published in Germany, which is part of the film. There's a German publisher who's publishing the book version of the documentary.
Excellent.
When you are in the midst of making a film, at least personally me, there's a kind of, I have this, I don't want to sound like extraterrestrial and E.T., Spielberg crap, but there's a sense where you've almost, I feel like extradite myself from reality and I become something else, And friends of mine tell me the kind of later, always the process that I go through when I'm trying to do the project. And I remember the first time I ever sent the idea out. And I live in Cape Town for the last 3 years, but and I just arrived in Cape Town, and I sent this proposal. It wasn't even a huge proposal, just 2 pages to people I know. Is this something you would finance? And to think, and to a couple of people that I thought would be really interesting to interview. I didn't even have money at that time for the film. So I send out, I'm really like the whole day, night, I send out thing. I wake up at 5 in the morning, and the following day, and then I open my laptop to see the thing, and 7 rejections. First things I sent out, both financial, both whatever. People just say, not for us. I don't want to do the interview. And it suddenly, I think the kind of excitement that I had, because I thought, it's about Nelson Mandela, I'll get the money, I'll get everyone to talk. And I had over 100 rejections. 100 rejections of people who refused to be interviewed. It was a process. And it taught me something about filmmaking, that the only person who makes the film is the filmmaker. You can be politically correct and say the financiers, the producer, the whatever, but really, really, if you want to make the film, the filmmaker has to make the film. Like, there is no doubt about it. You're the driving spirit. And of course, in this film, you have like great producers. You have got Catherine, who's really one of the most fantastic editors, I think, in the world. She's really, really incredible. Really, without her, this film would have been average, But for the driving force of a film, if you want to make a film, the only person who has to be so inspired, who has to believe that the film will happen, who has to somehow take a leap of faith, as they say, has to be the director, has to be the filmmaker. Without that sense of inspiration, when the director has no inspiration, it doesn't matter who else is interested in the film. You actually have to be the driving force. But I'm talking too much.
Yeah, we have to wind down.
Yeah. So, but to come to your thing is that I think talking about Nelson Mandela was difficult. So it wasn't easy. I didn't have, you know what I mean? It was difficult. It was very, very difficult. And people sometimes say things and whatever. And sometimes me, Catherine, and the producers disagreed on who we should have in the film and what should they say. Yeah. But I think the people who are in the film are the people who should be in the film.
Okay, Khalo, we have to wind down. I'm sure our audience also had a lot more questions about what we read in the papers about chaos and instability. And then we get such an inspirational talk from you, and we see such an inspirational a film that you made. So I would like to thank you for this wonderful film that you've made. And my last question has something to do with, is there hope for South Africa? And I don't even have to ask the question, because you've shown that there's really hope if filmmakers like you can make films like this. So thank you very much. On behalf of IDFA, we would like to present you with a small present. It's not a big raincoat for the darkness outside, but it's a nice little book. So on behalf of IDFA,
Thank you. Thank you very much.
ladies and gentlemen, Khalo Matabane.
Thank you. Thank you.